Hey Martin, great to see you. It's so lovely to talk to you officially while recording. It's
Fantastic. Good to see you too.
yeah, we always have these conversations, and we're at the end of these conversations, we're always thinking like, oh, we should have recorded this. So now we're finally doing that, which is something I'm very thankful for and happy for.
Yeah, well,
Uh,
let's hope we don't do a dud today and we fly as usual.
so one of the things I wanted to bring up today, and I think you may not even be aware of that, but when we started the company, which was called Robocopy at the time, you actually played a very important role in that because it was a conference in the Netherlands. It was a very small conference, and you were a keynote speaker, and you during your talk you referenced Wally Brill. And you talked about it, and you talked about how people are stepping into the world of voice and what's happening and all the developments there. And I was like, all right, this man might be my ticket to Wally Brill as well. And what I did, because it was a Dutch conference, I very quickly changed. I don't even know if I changed the slides to English or I just decided I'm not going to do my talk in Dutch, but I'm going to do it in English. And I had a mutual friend of CX company to invite you to my talk because you were talking about
That's right.
psychology and about Google. And I was like, all right, he's going to like my stuff, and I'm going to switch it up real quick, do it in English. And that's how we got to know each other and connected more. And we've had wonderful conversations ever since. So I don't know,
Yeah, it's all
were
about
you aware of that?
serendipity. All about serendipity, isn't it? And that's, and I mean, I do feel extremely honored, by the way. And I think that I can remember, that conference very clearly. I can remember talking with you, and we had a mutual interest in the CX company, which has now moved on. And just incidentally, by the way, I know we're talking industry gossip, but it's dead interesting. They've managed to attract Brian Manasama today, which is a fantastic piece of news. I'm really excited about that. The whole space is just basically developing, at pace. But I have to say, what I think you've done with the institute in what, that's 2 and a bit years, is it 3 years at most?
Yeah,
It can't be more than
we're
that.
3 years in now. Yeah.
It's interesting when you actually look at successful organizations and you go, yeah, of course, that's the momentum of a scaled business, a la California. But what you tend to forget is that those are fairly rare relative to everybody else who plods along, not getting the necessary, sort of airlift on the thing. And I think you've done a remarkably good job at evangelizing and getting momentum in there and tapping into a demand that's there. And I know some of the plans you've got are really exciting as well. So congratulations on grabbing that and making sure that Wally was part of the plan and managed to assist in terms of grounding some of the core stuff, which of course you've now enshrined and promote at scale.
Yeah, because I skipped over that. So through you, and we got the intro to Wally, and Wally helped us very much with some of the fundamentals about conversation design, and taught us a lot about the world of voice. And he's been active in it for so long, which was very exciting for us at the time, and also gave us, I guess, the confidence to do the things that we do now at an earlier stage that maybe we should it gave us more confidence than maybe we should have had at the beginning.
You need that. You need that in life. Sometimes you need to be ignorant actually about stuff and just have unbridled enthusiasm and keep going, and your luck will turn. And yours was turning in the right direction right from get go, I think.
Yeah, and one of the things that you always inspire me with, and what I learned from you is your background in customer service and CX, and how that has evolved, and really coming from the perspective of the life agent, which is being automated or changing, and because what was your journey originally, sort of going into this entire space?
Well, I suppose really it might sound a bit sort of too cosmic, but I've only ever really been interested in A, the fact I'm alive, which seems to be quite extraordinary if you meditate on that point. And consequently, I'm interested in people, and I've always really tried to, and, I'm at university, I did theology, and for a very simple reason that the guy that taught it at school and then subsequently after that, he used to sit on a long chaise longue in a wonderful room overlooking, the close where the cricket was played and everything. And we talked about stuff. We talked about life. And I thought, this is the best course I've ever done here. I'm really interested in this. This is relevant, and I've never really lost that. So anything that talks about people and, gets underneath the skin of it, I've remained fascinated by. And to that extent, got involved with some folk, spent a lot of time on not head-based, Oxford learning, which I just previously been doing, but heart and soul and experiential, very early on. And, as soon as CX turned up, I thought, well, given what I've already experienced in this space, I'll be dead interested to see how they interpret what experience is about. And I still think that sometimes it can easily be turned into a corporate slogan, and that the essence of it is lost quickly. But I have, from that work, discovered the power of particularly communication, listening, how transformative it is to identity and to somebody's success, how few times we actually listen, how listening terrifies people. You can see it in politics right now. I can't afford to listen to you because you might then persuade me, and therefore I'll just shut my ears. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's really powerful. And all I've done, I suppose, in 30 years is try to dance around finding ways to get organizations interested in potential and human development. And I have to say now, we're sport for choice. We really are. Some of the stuff that people get trained in these days, the recognition in the relationship between customer experience and employee experience, the current times around vulnerability and empathy, all of that sort of stuff, high performance and all of that. The world has moved actually very quickly in those 30 years. So I have retained that interest and find that there's a bigger and broader platform, kind of all the time. So, and I'm always keen, by the way, to take it from a basic level up to the next one, because the connection is right into, as I said before, potential, identity. I suppose the closest language these days is EQ, emotional intelligence. I think that's the word that people have gravitated around. And if you look and unpack that, there's some pretty heavy duty ideas sitting in the middle of that, and serious money being spent on it. So yeah, that's my background really, and found opportunity to get involved in the call center. Strangely enough, has proved to be a very interesting place where you get to see the humanity of a business, or the lack of it, in terms of the way they deal with customers and their employees. The truth of the brand comes through very strongly between what's promised, brand promise, and what's actually delivered. There's no better place to be. And of course, people often treat call centers in much the same way that they treat other forms of support, like the nursing profession and others. In other words, we expect it, but we treat you badly. Which is a very sad thing in life. And the call center, and I've been a big cheerleader for this, is to try to make sure that we're not just used as a dustpan and brush for upstream, screw-ups, basically, and to get it to a point of strategic value to the organization. And, that's been one of the banners. And without any assistance from me, I think what people generally have done in call centers and customer service since the pandemic is demonstrate their value to senior leadership in a way that maybe they hadn't appreciated before. But in many respects, they have saved brand reputation in this last year and done an extraordinary job.
So it's going from cost center to profit center almost at the end of the day. So what I like is, so you've always been interested in the human side. What does it mean to be human? What's communication? Then it's, agents. How do you create a human-centric organization? Now we're using more technology to automate the conversations that we're having, but then also, how do we make sure that is a human-centric experience that is valuable to both customers and the organization? And then eventually, I guess the future is, what does it even mean to be human when we have all these augmented versions of ourselves?
Well, we have, and there's a wonderful glide path towards that future. I would agree. I mean, the first thing is to remove the need for low-level, repetitive, non-value-add tasks out of the human domain. It's just a lose-lose. It bores the hell out of advisors. It costs the business unnecessarily, and it causes customers to sit in a queue unnecessarily as well, where they could have instant access. So the work that you are enabling into the world of virtual assistants is of vital importance to that. So self-service grows and is effective because, as we well know, FAQs are fairly frustrating. And one of the big discoveries, I think, with the development of voice is how powerful a conversational interface is for engaging with automated knowledge, and that's really, really powerful. AI is turning up on the proactive stuff, machine learning. You can see a pattern, in which case tell them before they knew that they needed to know it. Mm-hmm. And if you get both of those two bits going, plus they get rid of the debris because you're doing service design and you're not doing unnecessarily engagement, you're left hopefully then with humans focused on the emotive, the complex, and the relationship build, which is exactly what humans should be used for, which for me allows us to then reprofile what the job is, re-recruit, change the culture sitting behind of that, get less obsessed about time, more obsessed about quality. And the work that I've done in the last couple of years on emotive CX is all towards that end, which is actually engaging people's capability around of recognizing emotion at the beginning, in the middle, and the end of a call, and navigating the delivery of both the functional but also the emotive outcome. And that's a fairly high level of skill. So we're back then into that world of listening and empathy and all those kinds of good bits and pieces. And to me, that would be a great result to have humans, and that's, I think, where they remain. And then to the point you made, they will have their own virtual assistant as both an assistant, I suppose, within the contact center space, but also personally in life, and I'm sure children fairly soon are going to graduate through school with a persistent virtual assistant.
Yeah,
who will also probably have their medical records, they'll have their educational records, you'll have your own personal stuff in there that you don't want anyone, particularly your parents, to know about, and you'll take it through life. And that little virtual assistant will be your interface increasingly, to go and do your bidding, basically, at the end of the day. And I don't think we're that far off from that future. The seeds of that are already in place, aren't they?
Yeah, I think there's a few big trends in the world. One of them is, companies want more and more data, and people are losing trust in these companies. So you're going to see a shift of data ownership, right? Because it is inevitable that people are going to control their own data. So kind of everybody will be their own API, and then companies connect through their APIs and get access to the data temporarily, right? And once you have all your own data, then it becomes pretty easy in a way to create that virtual assistant, your personal AI assistant that can talk and act on your behalf. And then when that starts reaching out to companies, then it becomes much easier. Because otherwise, I'm always fascinated by the idea that now when you go, you're a human, you have a physical human interface in a way, and as soon as you go online, you are being pushed around by APIs, and your data is scattered, and it completely dilutes your identity, right?
Yes.
So you don't really exist in any way or form online. It's just every company tries to rebuild you based on digital archetypes and based on some fragments of data that they have of you. So you don't really exist, and your identity is entirely diluted. But now once you have your own online identity that you can control, then you, for the first time actually in the future, you will have your own online identity from which you can act, and then also artificial beings can be acting on your behalf.
Yeah. It's a very, very interesting point. There's a thing being discussed at the moment. I'm not sure if it's going to happen in your part of the world this weekend, but we've got a social media blackout happening on football, which is actually quite significant this weekend because there's some big results. It could be that Manchester City, that's my hope, isn't it? Manchester City is going to be declared, the winner of this year's stuff and all the rest of it. But we're not going to celebrate that on social media because we are objecting to the tardiness of the social platforms in terms of stamping out racism. And so it's a big object to that in order to accelerate them getting in line with that. But as a more general point, it is interesting that when a person's identity is to some extent dissolved or entirely removed online, what happens to some of the behaviors? And what happens in some of the behaviors is trolling. If we only lived in a face-to-face world, trolling would be a much more dangerous sport at the end of the day. It would be less frequent. And disambiguating human beings by making them entirely virtual actually has a dark side to it, which is that kind of behavior, at the end of the day. So restoring full identity is I think a really vital part of maturing, the digital online world, and as such, changing the nature of the behavior that goes with that. And we have to get to that point, depending where we are in the world in terms of the standards around of privacy and everything else. The fact is that there's just no evidence at all that any of the major platforms, and we won't get too personal in this conversation, but the mistakes around of managing personal data are persistently poor, with no real regard for that, as if it's our problem to solve, at the end of the day. And I think we just need to get to that point. So it's interesting, actually, to ask you the question. Are you anywhere close noticing the connection between the conversational AI bit and the privacy bit, are those starting to come together into systems, and are we starting to see some of the prototyping of that?
It's definitely something that everybody likes to talk about, and there's some general protocols that are in law already that people talk about. But what you see in general with security is that conversational AI is not big enough yet for security to be entirely interested. So it's like waiting for
Okay.
that. So most big enterprises, the security department is not really invested yet in conversational AI, which
Right.
I think will happen soon. Because what we talk about, it's like the promise of conversational AI, having those personalized transactions, personalized prediction type systems, that only works if we recognize if it is secure and if we recognize people. And so what we need to do for that, in order for even to come close to that, delivering on that promise, is give people data control, have a good identity system, because otherwise I'm not going to give access to the identity, and then
Yep.
recognizing that identity, and then having a very secure line in which the interaction takes place.
Yeah.
So there's certain fundamental requirements that we need to meet before we even can start thinking about really the more complex stuff. And sure, you want to open up a bank account. Who are you? SMS, verify that. We can do that, but
Yep.
to really get to the sci-fi future that everybody likes to think about and talk about in conversational AI, that does, we're a long way
From that.
from that. And I think it has to do with identity systems at the core, and more
Okay.
secure lines for that, which is one
Well,
of the bigger ones.
I have a question. I'd like to get back to present time, and it's been interesting just talking about the pandemic a wee bit and some of the change that everybody's talked about, which is, we as customers had to adapt. We've become more digitally orientated. We couldn't go out and do our normal stuff. Massive growth in digital, whatever the heck that means, but different, at the end of the day. And self-serve has definitely turned up as a real essential approach, given the way in which voice channel particularly has been, in many sectors, overwhelmed with demand. And anybody that's had to talk to people about financial holidays, or indeed real holidays, and had to rearrange them, those kinds of sectors have just found themselves overcome. So I think we've moved from, it would be nice to do self-service, to, goodness me, we really do need to kind of get on with it. And to that extent, quite a lot of research I've been using this year has said, since you've disrupted this pandemic's disrupted me, I've kind of woken up. I'm not necessarily as blindly loyal to brands. I'll try something new. You found, for example, if you talk to the credit card companies, the use of plastic has grown significantly in this last period, particularly with older cohorts. The way that they've adopted some of the newer channels around of messaging, particularly for family, staying together and communicating. It's a bit like 10 years ago, that was what Skype used to do for us all with the grandchildren in Australia sort of syndrome, but it's gotten reinvented, that whole thing. But we've got some significant changes. So we've got this omni-channel stuff going down at the end of the day. We are open to trying new things. We're in a much more positive, open-minded space. So brands, I think, have got a golden opportunity, to put stuff out and not wait for another 5 years before somebody might have a go at it. But what interests me, and this is really the focus of my question here, I, as you well know, have been waving a flag in a positive way around a conversational AI. Loved it. It's got lots of evidence of success. And again, some of the work that I've done with Dan Miller and his team with Opus Research, listening into his conferences, absolutely clear. This is before the current wave, 4, 5, 6 years ago, that if you had the money as an organization, you could really build some pretty splendid stuff that absolutely nailed it and absolutely worked. And yet this year, there has been some fairly high profile grumbling online about the fact that bots don't work, and very critical of it, and a bit hysterical. It's not terribly useful because the feedback isn't specific, but they just don't like it. So since you've got a very interesting overview on the market and a particular point that you are making in terms of the standards around of how you construct those conversations, I was wondering if you could reflect on why you think sometimes those just don't work and what the most typical causes are of why people are falling short. I mean, to preempt it slightly, IVR was always a nonsense when technologists built it.
It's very similar. I think the technology is developing very quickly. That's why engineers get excited, and a lot of these projects are engineering led. But you should probably lead with empathy, and that I think a lot of so. What you see go wrong is that there's a very big difference between developing technology and developing a product and then making that product useful. And sometimes people get confused because university research projects with very clever technology, we want to implement that and then we bring in all these engineers, but at the end of the day, they're often not necessarily useful to have a good conversation. So what you want to do as an organization is actually figure out how to talk to people. And so that's their entire concept of how do you design proper conversations. It's empathy. And how do you create empathy? It is, by mentalizing the conversation. So when we look at, a particular use case, it's like, what's actually going on here? Why is somebody reaching out? What motivates them? What are their anxieties? But also, what do they expect from this experience? Right? So are people reaching out because they don't understand the bill, or are they reaching out because, they see this big bill and now they can't afford it, and they have a birthday next week and now they can't buy a gift, and it's a big stressful moment in their lives, and that's the problem that you're solving, and how do you deal with that? So our entire workflow is like figuring out what's actually going on, mentalizing that situation, then having the conversation in role playing, like improvisational theater, to figure out what the most natural conversation is. And then, through Wizard of Oz testing, you kind of make that inclusive. So you want to test that first draft with other people, see if it works. And then we optimize it for behavior. So if we see, people are actually afraid here, or this is what's going on, etc., and we put in specific psychological frameworks, if you will, to make that conversation more successful. And once you start doing this and have this approach, it becomes more human-centric, and there's much more empathy. Because when you do the role-playing exercise, if I say, here's shoes, want to buy them, you'll say, but how much are they? Or I'm not, like, whatever concern you have, you will say out loud during that exercise. And that allows me to understand how to structure the information, which sequence to have, and that allows me to build in empathy. And the trick is that once you feel understood, when you really feel like I get you, you're very confident that I'm going to get you to a resolution. And so what you now see is a lot of technology is becoming very advanced in understanding everything that people say. But actually what I need to understand is what is the emotional intent that someone has. And once I figure that out and I tell you, I understand what you need, you pretty much follow along with whatever I'm suggesting, and you very much decrease your dependency on the technology. So you first need to figure out, with some disambiguation, figure out what's actually the intent here. And then I can ask you very binary questions and take you on that journey with me. And throughout that entire journey, I very much decrease my dependency on the technology. And I think if companies can save a ton of money by actually figuring out, what's going on in the conversation. And part of it could be around empathy. Empathy is not about feelings. It's about showing that you understand the situation. Yeah. And part of that situation can be, I don't like bots. They're terrible. I hate them. I expect this bot to be incredibly dumb. Perfect. Then we design that into the conversation, and we'll have empathy for that and work with that. And I think there's that misconception really about how that empathy is about feelings. It's not about showing that you understand the situation, and that is actually the key to taking people on a journey with you and making it successful. And I think
it's imagining another person's reality at the end of the day,
Yeah.
And figuring and the way dividing out and segmenting experience into the strands that make it up. You've got the emotive component is dead important in terms of how conversation flows, and I think it applies just as much to human as to automated, which is I need some evidence that this conversation is going to work for me.
Yeah.
And very early on, I want to know. We used to have a communication cycle that we learned and we taught people, and part of it very early on was duplicate with understanding. And that's really just a sort of a signal back to the person who's doing the talking that you're not talking into space here, guy. You're actually talking to somebody who's receiving it, who's making sense of it, and have another go at the next thing. And it's an interesting point on the emotive. I did a course last week with some folk doing on empathy and stuff with Frontline. And there was a really interesting conversation we were getting into, saying that one of the what we really mean by empathy is demonstrating that your concerns we're registering. We get it. Yeah. And he said, and this is, I think, what you're talking about with the role modeling. Somebody said brilliantly, he said, the trouble is with customers, they won't follow the script. Yeah. So what we're scripted to do as a framework is begin by saying, can I have your name and address? Now, the problem is, before I've even got to that point, because I'm being polite, the customer does a mother download of everything. The emotion, the need, the situation, and they blurted it out. And if the first thing I say in response is, and can I have, Hans, your name and address? It kind of says like, I don't give a shit what you just said at me, right? I've got in my script, by the way, the need to be empathetic, and I'll ask you, how's your day going? But you've missed the opportunity by a country mile. And of course, the very first thing to do is, and you could nail it instantly if you really listened, you could simply go, oh my goodness me, that sounds awful. I had one of those last week. You must be feeling really upset right now. Yes, click, I've got it. And now, by the way, let's get this thing fixed. Let's get your details up on screen here. Boom, boom, boom. And it hasn't taken anything, but what you have demonstrated is I've duplicated where you're at, at the end of the day. And maybe that is just one of the things that you were talking about with the role modeling, that the virtual, and I don't think there's any difference. I mean, one of the things that I've always enjoyed in our conversations is the conversation between a bot and a human has got to be constructed on the same principle as a human to a human. Otherwise, it ain't going to work, is it?
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. And that's also part of when we talk about the mentalization of the conversation, sort of that prep work, we also look at it from the bot's perspective. So in order to help someone with this use case, what are questions that I need to ask? What's information that I need? What's stuff that I might already know, right? And then when you do the role play and as soon as somebody says, well, this is what happened and I have this big issue, and you say, what's your name and address? The conversation immediately dies, and you hear that doesn't work. So what you then do, have empathy. I understand the situation. Hint the promised land. I'm going to try and help you figure out how to resolve this. Now you're putting in anticipatory enthusiasm because you're hinting that the problem is going to be resolved. If I would now even say, I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions. For most people, this only takes a minute. I'm doing expectation management because it only takes a minute. And I'm saying for most people, applying social proof. Right? So we figure out the context of the conversation. Through the role-playing, we identify everything that's wrong with it, and then we can apply psychology to actually solve all those issues and optimize it for behavior. And that's exactly, and if you would just have the conversation out loud once, you will realize that it doesn't work. And we need to figure out how to do this. And so
no
live
conversation is entirely linear. There's a whole, there's constant checking to make sure that we're on the same page, that it's worked, that we understand what's going on, and I guess what you're saying really is, because I completely agree. By the way, empathy is not a bit of tree hugging, sort of a feeling in that sense. It's really not about that thing. It literally is something you can construct by engaging in a series of questions that allow you to build up a situational understanding and even a backstory sometimes. I mean, one of the things that we get into quite a lot is the conversation about, so what's preceded this immediate incident with a customer? Because sometimes that context gives you incredibly important information about the state of the emotion. I might be somewhere way beyond disappointed into pretty close to rage, and not be aware of why that's happened, or indeed some of the backstory of, if we didn't get this fixed for you over 2 or 3 times, what else has happened in your life as a result? Other consequences that we need to own. So the ability to question customers and quickly get to the point of getting a full understanding allows us to infer what the state of affairs is in terms of mood, where that customer's at. And you can duplicate that in the way that you're kind of talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I guess customers are almost like people, right? And I think I get fed up with that a lot of times when people they talk about users, and in companies and particularly tech companies, they talk about users, but only drug dealers have users, right? Those are the
Quite.
only ones that have users, and it is about people
That's a
and
good
actually
line.
talking to
Yeah.
people and seeing them as people, and then understanding them as people, and then figuring out how to help them. And a lot of times, it's simpler than it may seem, because the trick is often treating them as people, having empathy, and that takes all the pressure out, and
Mm.
then you can just have a conversation. But there's so much pressure on it to get it right the first time. So
Yeah.
if somebody yells at you, like, so if I go to, I go to my local bank. I'm upset. I have a problem, and I'm at the desk, and I'm gonna be like, so this and that happened. It's crazy, and then my girlfriend did this, blah blah blah, and I tell the whole story.
Yeah.
The teller's gonna say, I see you're very upset. Thanks for sharing the story. Maybe break it down a little bit so I can help you. So tell me what happened, right? And they're also going to correct me and teach me how to talk to them in order for them to process the information properly so that they can help me. So there's no, somehow in AI we feel this pressure to understand everything in one go
Immediately.
and then have the solution straight away. But that's
So
not really what's
here's a
happening.
question. I completely appreciate that approach. And it strikes me as being exactly the way that humans work with humans anyway, at the end of the day. So there's a kind of a folklore that says, really, if you're going to do virtual engagement, you should keep it at the relatively simple. And forget about back-end integration on knowledge and live feeds and anything as far as that's concerned to get to an answer. But just in terms of comprehension, there's an implication in terms of what you've just said there that there is no ceiling to what a virtual assistant could comprehend about a human's situation if you're capable of breaking it down and iterating a conversation in the way you've just suggested.
Yeah. That because if you now look at GTP3 and system, there's multiple systems like that. You just give it information, you give it the entire context. So let's say I would know your entire purchasing history,
Yeah,
and I would know everything that you've done today. I could, whatever question I get asked about that, I can answer it because I understand the entire context of that. But still, I would design a conversation for it, because you can't, you can't just give all the key information. You can't. People can't process the full answer that you could possibly give them at once either, right?
mm.
It's also cognitive overload. So even if I understand everything that's going on as an AI system, I can't resolve it in one go because I need to work with empathy.
Yeah,
Because if you have this big problem and all of a sudden I'm saying, well, here's your solution, that that doesn't really work because there's also the emotional load of the
yeah.
problem which need to be addressed in a longer conversation. It doesn't mean
Are,
you have
are
to
you at
chat to
the
them for 5 minutes, but a few
okay?
turns properly designed, that's yeah.
Are we at the point where, in addition to just the hygiene of asking questions in that, effective way, if we can plumb in more and more data, because I think the other interesting thing I've noticed this year is a recognition, certainly around of AI, that you can't play the game until you've got your data to a certain level. That's axiomatic. It's the old story again: bad stuff in, bad stuff out. So you start to hear now maybe a recognition that CRM is a slice of that data, but it's not all of the data. There's a focus increasingly on customer data platforms, and everything that's going with that. You can even see it in the big acquisitions of people like Twilio buying Segment, and that
Yeah.
whole big positioning around of this next phase. And clearly, people are having another go at the 360-degree view. And of course, what needs to be done there is to select and somehow identify out of all of that, information, maybe from supply management right the way through to interaction history, what's relevant, what matters.
Martin, I got to stop you there. This is really exciting. Thank you so much. No, I love this conversation that we're having, and I think we should stop now and leave something for a next conversation, because I
Indeed.
think we have hours and so many things to talk about. What do you say?
Okay, that's cool. Well, listen, it's been a great conversation. Thanks very much, Hans. Enjoyed that. Till the next one.
Till the next one. Onwards and upwards. It's great seeing you, man, and glad we're finally recording this.
Yeah, indeed. That's great. Well,
All
thanks a
right.
lot. Learned some stuff as well. So hopefully other people enjoyed that.
Oh yeah, and before we go, if people want to reach out to you and they want to learn some about things you do, where should they go? Where do they find you?
Okay, so pretty prolific on LinkedIn. So you can connect like that if that's your kind of thing. If you want the website, it's www.brainfoodextra.com. So you can do that stuff. I'm still, tweet fairly consistently, or just look me up. You should be able to find me. So I'm fairly persistent online is the quick answer. Always happy to talk, always happy to help out.
Thank you so much. Great seeing you.